Hey, what's going on, guys? We're back with part two of our C Sharp tutorial. Um, Officially, it's kind of like part one because we didn't really do much in um, the actual part one. So we'll go ahead and get started. So for this first tutorial, until I actually get some feedback from you guys, if anybody's watching this in the first place, I'm gonna go ahead and start with setting it up to learn game programming because I think that's a little bit more fun. You can kind of see more as you're doing it, as opposed to net programming. So I'm just gonna go ahead and launch Unity. And okay, this is the project I had uploaded last. Open project or create new project rather. Okay, so I probably should have mentioned that in the last tutorial, but you guys might want to have downloaded Unity because I think it's probably the most basic game engine to start learning, especially for C Sharp, because there's a whole bunch of there's a huge code base that Unity's already put in for you. I'm not saying that there's not for other game engines, but I personally think this is the easiest. There's a lot of community support for this that not a lot of other game engines have. Okay, so let's make a new folder here. We'll call this okay, so I've been playing a lot of the game was recently on sale on Steam for like $2. It was called Sanctum, the first one, and I had wanted it for a while. I just never got around to getting it, and I've actually really liked the game. So whenever I'm inspired by something, I usually like to explore some of the concepts that went into making it. So let's go ahead and just make this. Let me see if I want any of these actually. We'll put in character controllers because that might speed up the process. Okay, no, we don't want any of these. So we can go ahead and hit create. Just give it a second. I'm gonna pause this here. Alrighty, so once that's loaded up, I don't know if anybody else notices this sometimes, but whenever I create a new project, this is always what it looks like, and it really botches up. Like you can see how offset my mouse is from the actual screen position. It really botches that up. So what you have to do to fix this is go to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and then just check use DirectX Direct 3D 11. Hit apply, and then you should be back to normal. So, if you haven't used Unity ever for the first time, let me go ahead and explain this a little bit. You should see several default windows loaded up. So on the left here is your hierarchy. These are all the game objects that are in your scene. So as you notice, we have one already, the main camera, which comes default like this. If you click on it, you'll notice a few things. One on the right here, this is called the inspector. This is detailed information about the object you have selected. You'll notice it has a transform, a camera component. You can click to enable and disable certain components, or not enable, but make them visible or not. But we don't need to mess with any of this stuff here. You'll see this is our scene view. And here, let me do a really quick rundown of navigation. If you hold down the right mouse button, your mouse button will turn into an eye, and you can just kind of look around. While you're holding right mouse button down, you can use the WASD keys to move around. Q is down and E is up. Okay. Down here is your console. Whenever you print data or an error or something, it'll pop up down here. If you click to the left of the console, there's another tab called your project folder. This is where all your assets are stored. And then animator, we don't need to go into that. Maybe in a later date and time, but not now. So first thing we need to get Visual Studio up and running. Let's create a new folder. Right click, create folder. Let's call it scripts. Okay, just for some organization, let's create another one, and we'll call this let's call this utilities. And then create a new C# script, and we're just going to let's call this test, okay? Then right click outside and do sync mono develop project. Because Unity doesn't come default with Visual Studios, it comes default with mono develop projects, which aren't compatible, so you have to hit sync. It'll work a little bit. And then it should load up Visual Studios, but for me it doesn't load it up correctly, so we have to manually do it. So just navigate to it, and then you're going to click on one of these SLN files. It doesn't really matter which. Okay, hold on, I forgot to keep in mind I have dual monitors, and you guys can only see one. This is also the game tab. Right now it's all blue. This is what our camera sees. We'll go into a little bit later. So in this tutorial, we're not going to really do any of hardcore programming. This is mostly going to be explaining about syntax now that we've got it all set up. So on your right here in Visual Studios, if you've never used it before, this is called your Solution Explorer. For the most part, these two are projects, but we don't use them. This is First Pass. These are for like scripts like this that use well, okay, it's hard to explain. So just don't even worry about it. All you need to know is we're gonna focus on our C# project. Okay, and you'll notice there's references. You can ignore that folder. And then this is the assets for our project. Assets, scripts, utilities, test. Remember we just created that? So whatever we do in here is going to reflect back into our Unity project. It comes default loaded like this if you created it correctly. Now this is just my personal preference, but I like to, this is my organization here. I like to put the curly braces on the next line. Okay. So this is probably your first time seeing code, maybe. So let me go ahead and explain some of the syntax. And if you don't know what syntax is, it is basically like programming grammar. You have to follow certain syntax, or else it won't compile, it won't work, it'll throw up error messages, whatever. So let me just explain that. At the very top here, you'll see a using statement. What a using statement does is it previous programmers have made things called libraries, and what libraries are is a bunch of code that have been compiled into DLL files. I'm sure, even if you don't know what it is, you've probably heard of a DLL file before. What that is just basically a bunch of code that's already been compiled that's available for us to use. For instance, within the Unity Engine DLL, there's math, vector information, physics, audio, all the stuff that a game engine should have, right? And then within system.collections, this is included because Unity Engine references system.collections. We don't really need to go into that until later, but basically what this does is using, and then it'll load up that DLL, and you can load up sub libraries as well. So like if I put a dot at the end, I can load up just unity.flash, or that's what system does. I can load up just the system library, or I can load up, there's a whole bunch in here that Microsoft provides for us. We'll just keep it as collections for now. Okay. Now public. Usually whenever you see a new property, I'll explain what properties are in a little bit. They're started with a keyword such as public, private, or protected, something along those lines. Those are just your accessor values. So if something is public, it means any script can access it. If something is protected, it means only a script of the same type can access it. More on that later. And if something is private, it means nothing can access it except for itself. Okay. Class. Class is basically means a script. It doesn't always have to mean that, but that's what you need to know for now until we develop a further understanding of C#. This colon here, that means inherit from. So basically, this test class is going to extend from our monitor behavior class, which is a class that comes built into the Unity engine. Basically, a monitor behavior is any object or any script that does anything within the game. If we remove the monitor behavior, this script would not be in. Even if you attach it to the game, it wouldn't do anything unless it's been called from. It's a little hard to explain, but we'll get there in a later date. Next, anything with 2 slashes, that's called a comment. So anything I type here will not affect anything in game. This is ignored by the compiler. Hold on a second. And so this is basically for reader view, to make things easier on the reader, so you can kind of tell what things are doing, because code gets messy sometimes, and comments really help, especially on a a team project. Like I remember my big problem was that I always was a lone wolf programmer, so I never did comments. But now that I'm starting to collaborate on projects, I have to start, going back and explaining what I did, and to yourself, and, oh yeah, I know what that does. But to other people, certain naming conventions you have just don't make sense, and so it's always a good habit to use comments. Okay. Next, you'll notice there's a keyword called void. Basically, whenever you create a new method or function, a function is something that does something, and it always looks like void, then the name of the function, and then parentheses, and then obviously followed by curly braces. Okay. Now, once we get to a later date and time, there's other ways of initiating, or not initiating, of return values for a method. If there's no return value, you just keep it as void. If you don't know what a return value is, we'll go into that later. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to go into for a simple rundown of what this all looks like. Now, the reason that this comes built in, like we didn't even type this at Game Startup, is because when we inherit from mono behavior, the game engine will actually automatically call functions within the script as long as it's attached to a game object. So, for instance, whenever a level is first loaded, every single object in the scene with a mono behavior will be called start. So anything we put in here will be, done as soon as the level loads. Update, as you can tell by the comment, it is called once per frame. So every time the computer renders a new frame inside the game, the code inside this function will be called. So that's pretty much a basic rundown of what I wanted to do for this tutorial. It was kind of just an explanatory thing, and then in the next tutorial we're going to actually start to do some programming.